What's up guys, Lifting here. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Path of Exile Survival Guide. In the first episode we went over like very super basic introduction to the leagues, which class to pick and why. And we also talked about the user interface, and we talked a little about like the skill gems and how to combine them and such. But it was very basic, and we're gonna continue now. We have a quest, the Mercy Mission quest, and I always suggest that for any new character that you're playing, that you will do the Mercy Mission quest. For one specific reason, and that is that it will be able to grant you a Quicksilver Flask. And I will show you what that is as we get there. But it's one of the best things you can get in the beginning. It will make Path of Exile more fun for you too. Either way. Another thing we'll also take a look at now is the June Veiled Master here. So basically this is one of the new Betrayal League mechanics that's been added. It's adding the whole Syndicate thing where, well, maybe let's just go into it and we'll talk about it. I will be completely honest with you though, the league is just released and there are still lots of things I don't understand when it comes to the whole betrayal thing. But I'm starting to get an idea of it. And as we continue further down the line, as more days will be passing, I'm sure I'll be able to create a guide for you guys or something like that, or at least tell it probably in one of the future episodes of the walkthrough or the survival guide. So let's do this.
Seek it out. I will meet you there, and together we will infiltrate it. Keep your eyes sharp.
So that's our first quest we get from June here. We need to infiltrate that fortification that some of those people from the Immortal Syndicate have put up here on the beach. So we will be encountering that as we continue, and we will then work our way towards the Tidal Island as we do so. If you remember from the previous episode, we decided on doing Freezing Pulse, and this character is eventually going to turn up as a Arc Totem Hierophant. But we're leveling with Freezing Pulse until we can get Arc, as it has a higher level requirement. And also Freezing Pulse just feels pretty good in the beginning. So what we can see over here, when we look at the minimap, we can zoom in a little too. Can we not? There we go. A little too much. But either way, these here indicate Syndicate members. When you see these, you need to be careful, because the Syndicate members are pretty damn nasty. And one of the reasons for that is most likely that some of them deal chaos damage. If not all of them, but at least some of them. And typically people don't really build around chaos damage mitigating that. If we go into our defenses, you press C on your keyboard and then you go into defense. Then you can see if you have armor or evasion or energy shield or something like that, it will pop up here, or well, energy shield will pop up here. But either way, armor evasion will show here. It will show your chance to evade attacks, your dodge chance and such, if you have that. However, what I want to show you now is the resistances we have here. So you have 3 elemental types of resistances, and that's fire resistance, it's cold resistance, and it's lightning resistance. And then you have a 4th type of resistance, which is not considered elemental. It's just a resistance type, it's chaos resistance. Now typically these 3 here, the 3 elemental resistances, is what you want to focus on. And I still think that even despite the whole Syndicate thing, then this is without a doubt the most important thing for you to focus on. But it may now be worth, we still need to figure it out in the current meta, if it may be a little more appealing to go for chaos resistance. It has started to shift a little like that lately, also with the incursions, and there was the chaos spitters and things like that. You'll get to see them later too. But either way, resistances, they can go from -75 up to +75 for all the resistances here. We have 0 in everything right now. This here indicates that we have 0 on our gear. And this over here, if let's say you had 80, for instance, fire resistance, it would show 75 here, because that's the max cap we can have. It's kind of a soft cap for our resistances. And I say soft cap because there are ways to change this. You can increase your resistances beyond the 75 max, but to do that you need specific unique gear, you need certain skill nodes too, and an example of that would, for instance, be the where is it? Barbarism skill node here. So it gives +1 to maximum fire resistance. That means that if we were to take Barbarism, we would be able to, if we had enough resistances, to take it to 76 fire resistance. And considering how big some of the hits are at late game, that extra 1% there can be a huge difference between how much health you'll be losing out on when they hit you with those. So they actually do make quite a big difference. And some builds like Righteous Fire and such, they want to stack as much fire resistance as possible. They want to get that max cap as high as possible so they don't burn themselves. You'll have to excuse me a little if I mumble, but it's as you can see, it's like 5 in the morning right now, and yeah, I just wanted to get some videos done. Either way, we're gonna try and see if we can get some fire, cold, and lightning resistance on our gear to begin with. It's not too important as we start out. It's not the end of the world if we don't have a lot of resistances right now. But as we continue further in, some of the bosses starts to deal a certain amount of elemental damage, and then it can be nasty. So this is a Fortification type of Syndicate. And there are 4 types of Syndicates. I guess there's actually technically 5 if you count the Master thing in. But this here is one of them. This is a Fortification. And let's just do this here and then I'll tell you about it. We'll get the fortress wall down, because when you encounter this, that's what it's all about. You need to get the wall down, and then you need to get in, and then you need to fight the boss in here. And in this case, it's Guff Tiny Grain. And if you by any chance are Scandinavian, like, seriously guys, are you seeing the same thing as me? If you're Scandinavian, are you seeing the same thing as me? I just love this name. It can't be a coincidence. Either way, we got him down. One thing to consider is there's typically this healing totem in here. It probably would have been a good idea for me to run in and kill that. Also, another thing, I think I mentioned it before, but our freezing pulse works so it shoots out in that line, it pierces things and can hit everything, right? And deals cold damage. But the further it shoots, the less damage it deals. So you're actually being rewarded by being a little closer with freezing pulse as opposed to many other skills, because it has a high base damage. So we killed this guy here now. Let's see what she says.
Talk to our captive. I will watch your back.
Yes, we have a decision we need to make now. What we're seeing here is the Syndicate tablet, and this is basically indicating the power of the Syndicate members that we will be encountering throughout Betrayal League here. Goff was one of the first Syndicate members we encountered, and oh man, there's so much to talk about when it comes to this, but I think for this video not to only turn into a Betrayal League mechanic explanation, I think we're just going to take it bit for bit. So I think I'm going to start it by the very basic thing that you need to know about Betrayal, and that is, if you look up here, you can see it says Transportation, then we have Fortification here, Research, and Intervention. And Intervention belongs to this block, Research here, Fortification here, and Transportation. And then this one up here, it's like I think it's called Master Research, or something like that. But either way, these here are all types of hideouts that you can get access to. And those hideouts, I'm not talking about the hideouts that you can use for yourself, but the hideouts where you can go into them and you can fight whoever is the leader of the hideouts. Fighting or completing the hideouts, killing the bosses in there can give you various bonuses. It can give you some great loot, it can give you some amazing crafting potential, especially with this guy here. I'll explain that later. But so basically, to not get too complicated right now, what we want to do is we want to take this bar here And basically it's information about safe houses. We want to get this up to 100. Once this is coming up to 100, we can access that safe house. And then whoever of the Syndicate members is in that safe house is who we will be fighting in there. And the idea is that there are certain Syndicate members that you would rather have or prefer to have in the safe houses as opposed to others. And we will be able to move them back and forth a little. I'll show you that as we continue. When you complete a safe house, you can then get master safe house information, and slowly that starts to unlock, but it takes a long time. The thing that happens when you then engage with a Syndicate member like we just did here, he will give us two choices. The left choice here is always going to be to interrogate. If you interrogate him, he will be moved down here and he will lose a rank. When they say rank here, they refer to I wish you could hover the mouse above this, but you can see the star right next to me, right? That indicates his rank, or we can see it down there in the bottom. If we were to interrogate him, that star would be lost and he would have 0 rank and he would not belong to any part of the safe houses. Right now he belongs to the fortification part of the safe houses. He has a job basically, and that he is working for the fortification boys. We can see that because he's linked here, he has a rope, right? And that the same goes for the person that's over here that we haven't discovered. The first thing you need to know is then that you can interrogate him, and that will give you 3 plus fortification intelligence per turn. And then remove his rank. There's also certain bonuses to having them high rank as they move into the fortification or into the safe house. You get an extra bonus then, but they also do get stronger the higher rank they are. One thing you can also see when you hover above the image here is that the text down here, it reads betting on item outcomes. Now I honestly don't know what that is right now, but the line is still important because it indicates what type of bonus Tiny is going to reward us with. If he were to be linked to the fortification instead of to the transportation safe house instead of the fortification, which is now, then the reward that he would give you when you then eventually dealt with him would be different. So basically you need to get the safe house research up so you can enter them, and then you want to move the Syndicate members strategically to the safe house or in that area to get a more planned reward. But we'll get more into that. So what we're going to do now is we're either going to interrogate or we're going to choose the fortification intelligence. And obviously this here, if we let him be interrogated and put him down here for 3 turns, that's going to give us 9 intelligence. So that's obviously more than the 6 plus fortification intelligence that we could be given. And the first time when I played this, I actually just interrogated them, thinking to myself, that's clever, I don't really need ranks on them either way. But my mind has changed a little on that. I actually think bargaining is the best thing you can do all the time, because you really don't want to lose the rank on the Syndicate members. Also because when they have been interrogated and leave, not only do they lose that rank that we talked about and you can get less for them, but they also become jobless. And when they're jobless, they don't belong to any of the safe houses. And you really want to be able to control them by having them be linked to a safe house. It will make more sense as we go further in. So for now, I'm going to bargain with him, and that's going to give us 6 fortification intelligence, and it will show up here once we've done so. So we're going to bargain, and you can see it happening there. And it also gave us some experience, right?
There it is.
That was a lot of gear.
That's the sense I was hoping for. Now,
let's pick this up.
Keep your eyes sharp.
All right, pretty cool. So let's see, was there any of these items that were unveiled? Oh, one thing I forgot to tell you guys, in case you already noticed, but since the last video, I remade the character actually, and I created it in solo self-found Betrayal League instead, and that's because I had some quests that were completed over in the other league that I want to show you guys as we complete them. So in case you are noticing the difference, that's why. But we will go into the regular league later. We'll convert this guy. So I'll still show you how to trade and all that stuff. But for now we're doing it to get the quest progression. So a lot of stuff is happening now here. And the first thing we're going to do is to level up our freezing poles. And I touched upon this briefly in the previous video, but we didn't really go into details or specifics about this. So when you have a skill gem, any skill gem, or almost any skill gem I should say, like 99% of them, they can gain experience and level up in Path of Exile. They can reach level 20 as the max soft cap, but there are ways to get a gem to level 21, 22, etc. with various ways of scaling it and influencing it. But that's way in the future. We're not gonna deal with that for now. So you can see when I hover over the freezing poles here, it's currently level 1. We can see how much damage it deals, all that stuff, and you can see that yellow border running down below the blue text. And that indicates the amount of experience that it has currently. So when we click level up on the freezing poles here, we can see the experience requirement is now 308, whereas it was 75 before, but it is now level 2, and we can see the damage has increased. And it also gained a bit of projectile speed. For freezing poles, projectile speed is very useful because projectile speed basically influences how far it can shoot to, not just how fast it does it. And the further it can shoot, the longer the distance it can travel without getting the penalty to the damage as it otherwise would. So for skill gems, soft cap level 20 for almost anyone, or for most of the skill gems, and they gain experience similar to you. They do not get experience penalties like your character can if you're over levels. But we'll talk a little more about that later. I know I say that a lot, but it's really to spare you from getting completely overwhelmed by info here in the beginning, and also because we kind of want to move on to the other things, right? So skill gem leveled up, nice. That's very important for spellcasters. Typically spellcasters benefit more from having a skill level up as opposed to someone who's an attack-based build. And that's because spells in general in Path of Exile, they gain a flat amount of damage as they level up. So an example, let's say it would gain 5 to 10 at level 1, and then at level 2 it would gain 10 to 15 or something like that. That flat amount can be scaled very efficiently via the nodes we have in the skill tree. The difference between a spell and an attack-based build is that the attack-based builds get that base damage to scale in the skill tree. They get that via weapons. So spellcasters, they have an easier way in that sense because they do not have to worry as much about constantly updating their weapons so that they fit their level, so they have proper damage to scale, because the spell will do that for them. This doesn't mean that spellcasters shouldn't care about the weapon they're using, because, for instance, this wand here, it's a very poor wand, but the example still holds true. It still gives increased spell damage, right? This does too. So obviously you always want to have the best gear as possible, but it's just even more important with the weapon when you're attack based. And it's also one of the reasons why the Arc Totem Hierophant, since it is a spellcaster, is a great beginner or starter build, because you don't have to worry about the weapons as much. Alright, so that was it for skill gems now, but there's much more to be said about that as we continue. Either way, we also leveled up, and that means we can spend another skill point. We went for the increased damage and the mana the last time, and that's because generic damage is good for whatever we want to do. It scales anything, both elemental, physical, poison, etc. We are dealing elemental damage with Arc, and or eventually we'll be dealing elemental damage with Arc, more specifically lightning damage, but it goes under that, or falls under that bracket. We're also using freezing poles now, And Freezing Pulse is a cold spell, so any elemental damage, or in this case just increased damage, will scale that too. So we're going to go with this, and then the next time we have to choose between the attack and minion damage nodes or the elemental damage nodes. Alright. Now you can't see this for the webcam, but normally you will have a quest complete box down here. And when you open that, you can see that we completed the first quest, breaking down the door, and that was the first of the betrayal quests. We still have the Mercy Mission quest, and that's what we're gonna try and go for now. But before that, however, we got a lot of stuff here. And we got a flask upgrade. I'm gonna put that up here. Oh, when we found this here, this one I want to tell you about later. But basically, these can be sold to vendors for a specific reward. So in general, you always want to pick up linked red, blue, and green socket items, even if they're white. Because you can, it's no secret. I don't know why I'm making it up. Oh, this is a secret, I'll show you. But basically you can sell them for chromatic orbs. And it's not that chromatic orbs have a ton of value, but they do have value and they're very useful. So typically it's always worth picking these up, at least until a certain point, then you can decide if it's worth your time or not. But in the beginning, absolutely. What else did we get? We got a helmet, we got boots, unidentified boots. In the beginning, when you start out in a new character in Path of Exile, boots is one of the most exciting things to find, actually. For one reason, and that is that they have a chance to roll movement speed. And at this level here, they can't roll more than 10% increased movement speed. As we get higher up into the levels, and as the items get a higher item level, we can see if we hover above this, it's item level 3. But as the item levels increase, the better rolls the items can get to. So we can get up to 15%, 20, 25, and there is even like at very, very high levels, 35%. But it's not something that's too easy to get a hold of. So I'm gonna use my Scroll of Wisdom on this, and we hope for movement speed. And we got it. That was pretty damn nice. And not only does it have movement speed, it also has lightning resist. So if we go to our defense tab here, we can see that the lightning resist currently is 0. And we then equip the boots. It now has 11 lightning resist. And the movement speed modifier is +10. So we're running a little faster now. It feels great. Indirectly, it also makes you, well, more safe, because you can get away from danger faster, you can move out of situations, but it also means you can get to monsters faster and kill more stuff. So that's what we like. We even got a pair of rare gauntlets too, but in general, boots really do take priority, because it's not like gloves can be very good in the beginning too, because of some flat damage they can add, but we'll see later as we identify these. We also had a blacksmith's whetstone. It's considered a currency item, but currency items is a big topic in itself that we'll talk about later too. And then we're gonna keep most of this and then sell it as we get back to town later. For now, let's move out and let's try and see if we can get to that Tidal Island in this episode. So, what was that? I had something I wanted to say now. Just lost my train of thought here. Oh, it is that when you are at the coast, one thing you need to pay attention to is up here in the corner when you have the map enabled, when you press the tab button, you can see that it says the coast and then it says monster level 2. In general, you want to stay within the level of the zone when you're leveling, or be like the experience system is a little complicated, and I'll talk about it later too. But basically, if you get too high level compared to the zone, or too low, you will get an experience penalty. Basically meaning you get diminished returns for the monsters that you kill, making you less efficient. So you never want to be too overleveled or too underleveled. In the beginning, it basically works so that you can be 3 levels above or below the zone until you hit level 16, when you hit level 16, that bracket increases by 1 level, and you can be 4 levels above the zone. So if you were in a level 20 zone as level 16, then that wouldn't give you a penalty. But if you were level 15 in a 19 zone, that wouldn't work because you hadn't reached that. We got a waypoint, boys. Waypoints, it doesn't need any explanation. You know what waypoints are. We can use this to travel back to town. And maybe we actually should. Anytime you find the waypoint, that means that you are close to the fetid pool, or the mudflats, sorry, and the Tidal Island down here. So anytime you find that, you will you know that you're in the right track. And in general, just as a quick tip, when you are at the coast zone as you leave the town for the first time, you typically always want to run top right or bottom right. It's in between that direction that you will find the entrance to the fetid pool. I keep saying that fetid pool is another zone. It's over here later. The mudflats or the Tidal Islands. Okay, let's go back to Lion Eyes because we want to sell some of that gear because we'll probably get more as we go into the other zone. And we can see June has returned to town now too. And
some of the members we have come across, well, they have come back.
Yeah, let's hear what she says.
I don't have any better way of putting it. They are no mindless zombies. Somehow, they are returning, whole. This must be why they call themselves the Immortal Syndicate. Immortality is dangerous, even in the hands of those with good intentions.
That is true. They are coming back, even if we kill them. She also has the chance, or the option, to unveil items for us. And we will absolutely get some unveil items to use for that in a very short amount of time. I'll show you that because it's a really, really cool addition to the game.
Knights.
But for now,
Welcome.
Let's just sell some stuff here. Let's see. So I talked about this item here, the red, blue, and green. If that is linked, these 3 colors here, when you then trade that to the vendor, he will give you a chromatic orb. A chromatic orb can reforge the colors of sockets when you use it on an item. So if we were to use a chromatic orb on this glass shank here, it would re-roll the colors. We could, like, because it's RNG, we could simply get all green again, but we could also get red, blue, etc. And one thing that determines how likely you are to get a certain color on an item depends on the attribute alignment of that item. So this one here, because it's very low level, doesn't even show the attribute alignment. I still think there is, as far as I know, I don't have this confirmed, but I think there's like a hidden attribute requirement that will make it so that even when it doesn't show that a certain amount of dexterity, intelligence, or strength required to be used, then it still at these low levels have a bit of an hidden attribute requirements. But basically, the higher strength this would have, for instance, the more likely it would be to roll red sockets. The higher intelligence, the more likely it would be to roll blue sockets. And the higher green, you get the point right. But let's sell this so we can get the chromatic orb. Another thing that's very important to know here is that unless you really need the gear here in the beginning, it's not really worth to spend all your wisdom scrolls on. Just keep them, because the gear here in the beginning, while it upgrades you and makes you stronger, the upgrades are rather minor. So in general, it's better to save them for a little while at least, and then use the wisdom scrolls on boots, for instance. You find those because they can be good. The gloves, we're going to identify them too because they're rare, and gloves can be pretty nice too. But since I don't really need the helmet here, I'm going to sell that. And when you sell an unidentified magic item, then it will give you transmutation shards. If you were to sell it identified, actually, let me show you that. I'm going to sacrifice this wisdom scroll to show the difference. So this here, you can see transmutation shard. If we were to sell it identified, it will give us alteration shards. And that's because there exists something called transmutation orbs and alteration orbs. They do 2 different things, and we'll get into that later. In general, it's better to sell them unidentified if you know you're not going to need them. You get a little more from it. So we're going to sell the helmet here. We're going to sell these gloves here. We don't need a one-handed mace. We're going to sell the staff, the club, the glass shank, and the other bow here. Alright, let's identify the gloves too and see what they had. And this is actually a good example of some gloves that are pretty sweet. Not for our build, unfortunately. We can still use them. But if you were an attack-based build, these gloves would be pretty nice to get in the beginning because they add 1 to 2 cold damage to attacks and 1 to 5 lightning damage to attacks. That may not sound like a lot, but remember here in the beginning, when you don't deal a lot of damage, that small amount that you get on top of that, you can then scale more efficiently via the skill tree, via your support gems, etc. So this small amount here can actually make a big difference when you're fighting low-level monsters. And of course, as I talked about earlier, the higher item level of the item, the better these rolls can be. Now we're lucky because it also has 7 to maximum life. Life we can always use, and you should always, for a life build, I cannot emphasize this enough, this is one of the biggest issues a lot of new players run into. But they forget to put life on their gear. They forget to scale the life that they have. I'm going to explain that right now after we've sold this. But right before that, another thing that can be very useful here in the beginning is if you're running out of wisdom scrolls. If you have a blacksmith's whetstone, you can use this to improve the quality of your weapon. Improving the quality of a weapon will increase its base damage. So if you were to use it on the crude bow here with quality on it, that base damage will gradually increase. The better the weapon is, the more you get from putting quality on them. But since we aren't going to use any weapons to attack with, we don't really care about the base damage of any weapon here. So instead, I'm going to take my blacksmith's whetstone here and I'm going to sell it to the vendor, because if we do that, I'll show you, boom, for one whetstone, you get 4 scrolls of wisdom. And wisdom scrolls are hugely important here in the beginning of the game because you are a little wisdom scroll starved. So we're going to sell this and we're going to get this here in return. These are currency items here. Then we're going to take our gauntlets here and we can see we have 885 life now. And with this, we're going up to 92 life. And we also get cold resistance and mana gain on kill. So it's okay. It's definitely not the worst gloves we could have gotten. But as compared to, of course, late game, these are complete garbage. So the thing that was very important for me to tell you about the whole life scaling thing is that one of the big mistakes that many new players make in the game, and I made this too, is that they have most likely heard from their friends or other people who play the game, maybe some streamers, etc., that it's important to get enough life in your skill tree because otherwise you're just going to be too weak, because a lot of people tend to just focus on the offensive skill nodes because it's more fun, right? You just want to get damage right. So they neglect the life nodes. But then the other mistake is that even if when they've then heard that, they start to pick up the life nodes, but they don't really get a lot of life. And they don't get it because they have a ton of life nodes in the skill tree. So for instance, this 5% increased maximum life. The thing that's important to know is that you need to pay attention to that it's a percentage increase. And let's say you have 0 life. This is just to make this is a poor example, but it will still prove my point. Let's say you had 0 life. What happens when you take 5% and increases it by that? So 5% of 0, it's still going to be 0. However, if you had 1,000 life and you were to take the 5% node, this node suddenly has something to work with, and this node will efficiently be able to scale your health. So it's very, very important that you always make sure, if you are a life-based build, on any rare piece of equipment that you get that can have life roll mods, and that would be pretty much any type of rare gear except for weapons, you want to get as much life as possible. Typically, before mapping, you would see yourself having probably around 70 at least on any rare item. And a lot of people then also kind of make the mistake of getting too hung up on uniques. And uniques doesn't always have life on them, so they will deck them out completely with unique items. But that then means that they have no flat life and they can't scale the life. We'll talk much more about that later as we go more into itemization. But just, if there's one thing you need to take home from this video here, it is to get flat life, so your life nodes actually matter in the skill tree. It's also one of the reasons why this node here, Discipline and Training, is absolutely insane compared to other skill nodes, especially in the beginning, because 30 plus to maximum life, suddenly you're being given a flat amount, and you can get this very early on. So this node here, this is actually a notable. Just so you know the Path of Exile lingo, these here are skill nodes, these here are notables, the bigger ones, and then you have something like Resolute Technique or Runebinder, Ancestral Bond. The big ones here, these are considered keystones. So I've lost what I want to say. There's too much info to give out. But either way, this node here is very efficient in the beginning because of the flat amount it gives. Now, I think you guys get the point. We're not going to talk about the stash yet. We will go back to the coast, take the waypoint back, and we will then go down here towards the Tidal Island. And it's also maybe worth knowing that if you're too slow about going back to town, back and forth, then every 15 minutes, I believe it is, the zone resets. So if we had waited longer, you would have to like rediscover the map, and it would be a different map in almost any case. So we can go into the Tidal Island now. Let's do it. And here we are going to search for the medicine chest and take it back to Bestel. And we are, as you can see, our character is level 3 right now, and monster level is 3, so we're good, it's fine. We don't have to worry too much about it. We're gonna level up soon, but as I said, you're somewhat safe within range as long as you don't exceed the level by 3 levels in the beginning, or when you get to 16-4. Ooh, and here's a lot of monsters here, so look at the experience we gain. Ooh, we level up, very nice. And I guess, now, I've never used this here because the tutorial text system was added later after I played the game for a long time, so I didn't need it. But it may be worth reading these information bits that you get as the game presented to you. But in my opinion, it's a discussion we're not going to go too much into, but I don't think that they do a very good job of presenting these things, because it's too much to read at the beginning. No one wants to read 16 pages of long written posts to understand how things work in the beginning. Either way, I want to show you something with the plate vest here. I'm gonna pick up the portal scroll and just the other stuff here real quick. Oh, actually, before we do anything, this is Hailrig. We got pretty lucky and found him right off the entrance here, or by the entrance. And one thing to know about Hailrig is that he can actually be pretty damn dangerous. He's not as dangerous as he used to be in the past, but he can still hurt a bit, and that's because he has 2 different attacks or offensive abilities. He has the Glacial Cascade, which is what you see there. It's the spell he casts. It's a cold spell that also deals physical damage, and that can deal a lot of damage, especially if he crits. It can take you unaware, and you can actually go down to him pretty fast. So try and like run around, and then when he casts, you know, that will trigger his animation, and that means you have a bit of time to go about and kill him. The melee attacks he does isn't too important. So after we kill him, we gain another portal scroll. We're gonna pick up the items here and just sell them to the vendor, because why not? We're going back to town either way. Medium life flask, that's nice. That's gonna be an upgrade to a small life flask. And yeah, let's just pick up everything because we can sell it. Then there is anything with a green text indicates that it's a quest item and should in general always be picked up. There's a few exceptions, but in general it says take the medicine chest to Nessa, and we can see when we then select the mission here in our quest tab then it will ask us to go back to town. So we're going to do that, and a quick tip here for people who care about that, who wants to be a little efficient, is that instead of spending a portal scroll here or going back to the waypoint, you can simply press exit to character selection. Whoops, now there goes the efficiency. But basically you can exit back to that, and then you can select your character, and you will start out in the Lion Eyes Watch, because it always takes you back to the city that belongs to the act that you logged in or out from. Alright.
Farewell.
And this here is why we did the quest. When you do the quest, even though it's Bastel who asks you to go get it, you turn it in at Nessa, and she will reward you with either a medium life flask, a medium mana flask, or the Quicksilver Flask. And you should always pick the Quicksilver Flask. These here you'll get a lot of either way. You can buy them from the vendors too. Quicksilver Flask is not available from the vendors in the beginning, so get the Quicksilver Flask. It's 40% increased movement speed in the standard version, and then you can actually upgrade this too. But we'll just keep it as standard for now. We're gonna get the Quicksilver Flask, and we're gonna equip that in our 5th slot here, and take that one off. We also, after this quest here, get the chance to get a new support gem to use for our spells. And there's a few here that's actually very good for our setup. Arcane Search, we want to use that. The way it works is that if you spend a certain amount of mana using, let's say we were to link Arcane Search with Freezing Pulse, then when we have cast Freezing Pulse and spend a certain amount of mana, Arcane Search will proc. And when Arcane Search procs, it will give us more spell damage, it will give us more cast speed, and it will also gain us 0.5 of maximum mana regenerated per second. And it's a buff that lasts for 4 seconds. But if you link that with a skill you use very oftenly, then you can pretty much have this buff up pretty much all the time, right? We can see down here by the system here, it says active skills. With the skills that we have right now, we can link it to Freezing Pulse or Frostbolt. It will work with that. So Arcane Search is something we want to have. Another thing to take note of is that it's level 2. All of these here are level 2, and this depends on how high level your character is. If I were to come back here as a level 90 character, I think they would be around level 13, 14 or something like that. They don't go up to 20, but they do get a bit of experience depending on your own level. So Arcane Search is definitely something we would want to have. And as it levels up, the stats or the bonuses, they will increase too. Then there's Ruthless. And we can see when we look at this, it's a support. All of these are supports, but I'm going to say it anyway to emphasize or establish the connection here. It's a support, it's melee, and it's attack. So since we are using Freezing Pulse, which is a spell, and it's not melee, Ruthless wouldn't do anything for us. And similar to, like you can see with active skills down there, it has a red cross above, and it means that it will not have any effect. If we were to use the Glacial Hammer that we had earlier, then it would show it differently. It would be supporting that, for instance. There's Change to Bleed too. It's an attack-based support gem. Again, we can't really use that, right? We have Onslaught. This is what I talked about in the first video that I want to get. Onslaught is one of the absolute best support gems you can get early on. It's because it gives you a huge bonus to attack speed, cast speed, and movement speed. And it doesn't really say that on the gem here by default, but if you hold down Alt on your keyboard, then it will describe or tell you what it is that Onslaught does. And here it says Onslaught grants 20% increased attack, cast, and movement speed. The way it works is that when we have linked it to Freezing Pulse, then there's a 26% chance at level 2 Onslaught for it to grant the Onslaught buff for 8 seconds if we deal a killing blow. So basically that means when we kill something. Then there is Spell Cascade. We can't really use that for our setup right now. It can be good for other spells like Storm Call, etc. But we don't want to talk about all of them. Storm Barrier, we're not going to talk about that either right now. It's not something we'll be using. Then there's Ancestral Call. This is a support melee attack support gem, so we're not going to use that either. But for now, since we want both of them, and we can only select one, you should always pick the one that has the highest priority. We will be able to get the other one, and typically you always will if you've been picking up a bit of stuff and selling it. But always go with the highest priority, of course. So we'll pick the Onslaught gem here.
While we live, we are blessed.
And we will put that into our green socket here, which is linked with Freezing Pulse up here. And one thing you can see when we do that, it's a little hard to see maybe down here. It's a rather small icon. But if I take this out, you will notice that the icon, the Freezing Pulse icon down there, it gets an N up there. The N is basically an indication. It's like short for Onslaught somehow. Faster attacks, for instance, is A and such. So they have certain letters, these support gems. But we can see that it's being applied to the Freezing Pulse, and that means that it's now actively supporting the Freezing Pulse, and we can use it with it. If no icon were added, it means that the support gem doesn't do anything for that spell. We also wanted Arcane Search. Yes. So since we have been offered Arcane Search in a quest now, that means that we can at any time purchase that gem from the vendor too. So as I showed you in the first video, when we go to the second tab of the vendor here, we can buy the skill gems. And if you remember, then the first time we did this in the previous video, we only had these skills here available to us. But since we unlocked all those support gems now, we can always purchase them now. And they're pretty damn cheap here in the beginning. 1 Scroll of Wisdom. That is pretty manageable. So we're going to buy the Arcane Search too.
While we live, we are blessed.
We're then going to take the Arcane Search and we're going to put that up there. And as you can see down there, it gets N2. Okay, that's... okay, but it has a blue icon, and you can't see that on the gray down here, but you can see it up on the icon above. So we currently have our Freezing Pulse now. It's what people refer to as a 3-link. And it's going to feel pretty damn good when we go out and kill stuff with it. I wanted to talk about the plate vest here that we equipped just before we fought Hailrake here. And the reason you need to know about this is that in almost any case, if people find an armor, they think to themselves, hey, nice, this grants armor, this is going to make me more tanky, and that's true. But in the beginning, because the rolls are so low, it's not really that important. It's like... And the downside is that if we go to our defense tab here, we know we got 10% increased movement speed modifier from our boots, right? But it says 7% here on our defense tab right now. And that's because armors, they reduce your movement speed by 3%. So if we take it off, you can see that it changes over to 10%, right? So in general, in the beginning, it's not really worth using an armor because the bonus you get from the armor is so little that it doesn't matter much. Evasion armors are actually the best in the beginning, but that's a different discussion. So I'm gonna take it off, and until we find something useful, I'm just gonna not use it because I prefer having the movement speed, to be honest. Alright, so we're just gonna talk real quick to Bestel here, and because OCD I can't handle when there's too many of these things above us, even if we didn't have to. We're gonna talk to Tarkley too, and he gives us the next quest. He wants us to clear the fetid pool. That's was the area that I kept talking about earlier that wasn't the right one. We also leveled up, and we are now level 4. We're gonna spend another skill point here. And we can choose between attack and minion damage nodes, or we can choose elemental damage. And for the keen viewer, he will already know, or she will already know, that we're not an attack-based build. We don't use minions either. So this here is kind of a waste. We don't want that. But we are elemental damage because we're using Freezing Pulse, and we'll be using Arc later. So elemental damage, apply point, and currently has 24.5. When it's applied, it has 25.3. Doesn't sound like much, but it makes a difference here in the beginning because the monsters don't have a lot of life either. If we then check our quests, we have the Dirty Job quest. It wants us to go and clear the fetid pool of all the undead, and that's a zone that belongs to the mudflats that we could access by the coast waypoint too. So basically what we need to do now is to take the waypoint back to the coast, go into this zone, and then continue onwards. However, the video is already running a little long, and I think we covered a lot of important stuff in this one here, so I think we're gonna end it for now and continue in the next video. Want to catch the live action, then visit me on Twitch TV/lifting. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?